In the constant hustle of the modern world, the quest for one's true self remains one of the most profound and transformative explorations a human being can undertake. This search, far from being a simple exercise in passing introspection, constitutes a spiritual journey with multiple dimensions, an inner pilgrimage that traverses the layers of social conditioning, external expectations, and identity masks we have accumulated over time. Finding your true self is not a destination, but rather a continuous awakening process, a dance between shadow and light, a reconciliation between our contradictory aspects. This thesis explores the contours of this fundamental quest, examining the obstacles that separate us from our authentic essence and proposing pathways to access this inner truth waiting to be discovered. We will navigate through perspectives from various spiritual traditions, contributions from modern psychology, and testimonies from truth seekers who have traveled this path before us. What is the true self? Whispers the seeking soul. It is what remains when everything superficial falls away, answers the wisdom of the ages. This existential question resonates within each of us, sometimes as a distant echo, sometimes as an urgent cry that can no longer be ignored. In an era where identity becomes increasingly fluid and fragmented, where social roles multiply, and where traditional definitions of the self are questioned, this quest acquires a particularly crucial dimension. We all wear masks. These facades that we present to the outside world serve as mediators between our inner world and the social reality we inhabit. Philosopher Carl Jung spoke of the persona, that public face we show to others, carefully crafted to meet the expectations of our environment. These masks are not necessarily false or dishonest. They constitute necessary adaptations to life in society. We all play multiple roles, observes the sage: parent, child, professional, friend, lover. Each context calls for a different aspect of ourselves. But then, where is the true self among all these roles? Wonders the disciple. Perhaps in the very consciousness that can observe these different roles, suggests the master. The problem arises when we completely identify with these masks, when we forget that they are merely temporary garments and not the essence of who we are. Sociologist Arlie Hochschild introduced the concept of emotional labor to describe how certain professions demand not only specific behaviors, but also precise emotions. The flight attendant must smile. The doctor must remain detached. The teacher must show enthusiasm. As we perform these emotions, the boundary between role and self begins to blur. The multiplication of virtual identities in the digital age has further complicated this phenomenon. We create curated versions of ourselves on social networks, avatars optimized for external validation. These digital fragments of our identity can gradually colonize our perception of who we truly are. The accumulation of these masks can lead to profound alienation, that troubling sensation of being a stranger to oneself. Psychiatrist R.D. Laing described this phenomenon as ontological insecurity, a state where the individual loses the feeling of being real, authentic, whole. This alienation often manifests through subtle but revealing symptoms: a persistent feeling of inner emptiness, a sense of imposture even in the face of one's own successes, decisions guided primarily by external expectations, difficulty identifying one's own desires separate from those internalized, chronic emotional fatigue related to maintaining facades. Poet Fernando Pessoa, who wrote under multiple heteronyms, each with its own personality and style, expressed this fragmentation of self. I am the abyss where my life loses itself, an endless fall toward nowhere. What, then, is this true self that we seek to rediscover? Definitions vary according to philosophical and spiritual traditions, but certain common themes emerge. The true self could be conceived as a conscious presence. Beyond thoughts, emotions, and sensations, there exists a witness consciousness that observes without judgment. Several meditative traditions point to this consciousness as our essential nature, an inner integrity, the harmonization between our deep values, our external actions, and our daily choices. Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard saw authenticity as the successful synthesis between the finite and the infinite within oneself. A dynamic emergence, not a static essence to discover, but a continuous process of becoming. As philosopher Martin Heidegger expressed, authenticity resides in our capacity to project ourselves into our most authentic possibilities, a transcendent interconnection. For certain spiritual traditions, the true self transcends individuality to merge with a universal or divine consciousness. The authentic self is not something to fabricate, explains the Zen master, but rather what remains when one ceases trying to be someone. How can I find it then? Asks the student. By ceasing to search elsewhere for what has always been here, responds the master. Our quest for authenticity first encounters the many layers of conditioning accumulated since birth. We are born into pre-existing family, cultural, and social structures that shape our understanding of who we are and who we should be. Anthropologist Margaret Mead demonstrated how different cultures produce different types of personalities, considered normal. What is perceived as the natural expression of self in one society may be seen as pathological in another. Our identity constructions are deeply influenced by these cultural matrices. At the family level, psychoanalyst John Bowlby's work on attachment revealed how our earliest relationships define our internal working models, those unconscious patterns that determine our way of relating to ourselves and others. The child who learns that their authenticity is not acceptable develops adaptive strategies that can distance them from their true self. You must be strong, don't show your emotions, hears the little boy. Be nice, don't disturb, learns the little girl. Succeed at all costs, it's the only way to be loved, understands the child. These messages, repeated and internalized, become the inner voices that divert us from our truth. Paradoxically, we often fear what we most ardently seek. Authenticity involves real risks. Fear of rejection. Showing one's true self means exposing oneself to potential judgment from others without the protection of social masks. Fear of the unknown. Our false self, despite its limitations, offers familiar security. The true self remains unexplored territory. Fear of responsibility. Authenticity implies taking full responsibility for one's choices without being able to hide behind imposed roles. Fear of symbolic death. The path to authenticity often requires abandoning identities to which we are deeply attached. Psychoanalyst Wilfred Bion spoke of nameless dread, that primitive anxiety in the face of psychic disintegration that profound transformation of the self can evoke. Chapter Modern: Distractions and Dependencies. Our era offers an unprecedented arsenal of means to avoid confrontation with oneself. Philosopher Pascal already observed that all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. This difficulty in facing inner silence has been exponentially amplified. Overconsumption, overactivity, overinformation, social networks, continuous entertainment, all these elements can function as avoidance strategies. Paradoxically, these distractions that claim to connect us often distance us from our most essential connection, that with ourselves. Dependencies, whether related to substances or behaviors, represent the extreme form of this flight from self. As Carl Jung wrote, addiction is a spiritual quest gone wrong. The ancient practice of meditation offers a direct path to encountering the authentic self. By cultivating sustained and benevolent attention to the present moment, we progressively develop the capacity to observe without identification the flow of our thoughts, emotions, and sensations. This stance of conscious witness allows a fundamental discovery. We are not our thoughts, we are not our emotions, we are not our sensations, we are the consciousness that observes them. This realization constitutes what philosopher Ken Wilber calls the developmental turn, the passage from being immersed in one's subjectivity to being able to observe it as an object of consciousness. Contemporary neuroscience confirms the profound impact of meditative practices on the brain. Brain imaging studies show that regular meditation modifies neural circuits associated with attention, emotional regulation, and self-perception. Neuroscientist Richard Davidson speaks of an emotional neuroplasticity that allows reconnection with deeper dimensions of our being. I searched for truth for years in books and teachings, confides the meditator. And what did you find? Asks the master. That the answer was in the silence between two thoughts all along. Psychologist Carl Jung popularized the concept of the shadow, those aspects of ourselves that we have rejected, repressed, or denied to correspond to family and social expectations. These disavowed fragments of our psyche do not disappear. They continue to influence our behaviors from the unconscious. Working with the shadow consists of recognizing and reintegrating these repressed aspects. This process of individuation, according to Jung, is essential for accessing complete authenticity. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This exploration can take various forms: analytical therapy, introspective writing, dream work, expressive artistic practices, symbolic transformation rituals. Contemporary philosopher Robert Bly uses the metaphor of the shadow bag that we drag behind us. The more repressed aspects we put in it, the heavier this bag becomes and the more it drains our vital energy. Integrating the shadow liberates this blocked psychic energy, allowing a more complete and authentic expression of our being. Reconnection with the body represents a privileged path toward authenticity. In a culture that excessively values intellect, we have often lost contact with somatic wisdom, that intuitive intelligence expressed through our physical sensations. Philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty affirms that our body is not merely an object among other objects, but a construction that gives us a point of view on the world. Our body is not simply a vehicle we inhabit, but the very foundation of our being in the world. Approaches such as focusing, developed by Eugene Gendlin, the Hakomi method, or various dance therapy practices invite us to develop subtle listening to bodily messages. This somatic intelligence often offers truths that our rational mind cannot reach alone. My mind says everything is fine, but my body contracts observes the person. Your body may hold a truth that your mind is not yet ready to hear, suggests the therapist. Researcher Brené Brown has highlighted the deep connection between vulnerability and authenticity. Her work demonstrates that the capacity to open up, to show oneself as imperfect, to risk failure or rejection, paradoxically constitutes the royal road to a more authentic and fulfilling life. Vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change, affirms Brown. By daring to show ourselves as we truly are, we create a space where our true self can express itself and flourish. This authentic vulnerability fundamentally differs from victimization or weakness. It demands, on the contrary, considerable courage, the courage to be imperfect in a world that values apparent perfection, the courage to say, "I don't know," in a world that rewards certainties, the courage to express one's needs in a world that celebrates self-sufficiency. For many spiritual traditions, the quest for the true self extends far beyond the framework of individual personality. It points toward a transcendent reality that would constitute our essential nature. In the Buddhist tradition, anatta, non-self, suggests that what we take for our permanent self is merely a temporary construction, an assembly of aggregates in perpetual change. Attachment to this false self is considered the fundamental source of suffering. Vipassana, insight meditation, aims precisely to pierce this illusion to realize our underlying Buddha nature. In Hinduism, particularly Advaita Vedanta, the concept of Atman represents the true self, identical to Brahman, the universal consciousness. As expressed by the famous formula Tat Tvam Asi, you are that, our profound identity would be fundamentally divine. The Abrahamic mystical traditions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, also evoke this transpersonal dimension of authenticity. Sufism speaks of fana, the annihilation of the ego in union with Allah. Kabbalah explores the return of the soul to its divine source. Christian mysticism, with figures like Meister Eckhart, evokes the birth of God in the soul as ultimate realization. Who am I really? Asks the spiritual seeker. Neither this nor that, responds the sage. What remains when all identifications fall away? An emerging contemporary perspective conceives authenticity not as the discovery of an isolated and autonomous self, but as the realization of our fundamental interconnection with all beings and the entire planet. Philosopher Thich Nhat Hanh popularized the notion of interbeing, the idea that we inter-are with everything that exists. In this perspective, our true self includes others, nature, and the entire cosmos. The illusion of separation would constitute the root of our inauthenticity. This ecological vision of self finds echoes in contemporary science. Quantum physics reveals the fundamental entanglement of all things. Ecology demonstrates our dependence on natural systems. Social neurosciences confirm that our brains are fundamentally wired for connection. Biologist Andreas Weber proposes the concept of enlivenment, the idea that human authenticity cannot be separated from our participation in the vast network of the living. Our disconnection from nature would thus be intimately linked to our disconnection from ourselves. Artistic creation represents one of the most powerful manifestations of authenticity. The creative act, when it emerges from the depths of being rather than the ego, allows a direct expression of the true self. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi studied the state of flow, that total immersion in creative activity, where self-consciousness paradoxically disappears in favor of an intensified presence. This state reveals a form of authenticity that transcends the duality between being and doing. Many artists testify to this spiritual dimension of creativity. Painter Wassily Kandinsky described true art as a mysterious force that works through the artist. Composer Johannes Brahms affirmed that his best work seemed dictated rather than consciously composed. This perspective suggests that authenticity can be approached not only through introspection, but also through expression, by allowing the true self to manifest through creative acts that transcend the limits of the ego. An authentic life manifests through coherence between our deep values and our daily actions. This process begins with identifying the principles that truly matter to us, not those we have passively absorbed from our environment, but those that resonate with our essential being. Psychologist Martin Seligman proposes exploring character strengths, those qualities that, when expressed, provide us with a sense of energy and authentic accomplishment. Unlike skills acquired through simple learning, these strengths represent natural expressions of our true self. Alignment, then, involves conscious choices, sometimes difficult ones, to reorganize our life according to these essential values, revising our professional commitments, transforming our relationships, simplifying our lifestyle, reducing our distractions, dedicating time to what truly nourishes our soul. "I've succeeded by all social criteria," confides the businessman, "but I feel empty inside." "When was the last time you felt you were fully yourself?" asks the mentor. "When I was volunteering teaching children on weekends, long before my current career." Our quest for authenticity cannot be separated from the quality of our relationships. Philosopher Martin Buber distinguished two fundamental modes of relationship: the I-it relationship, where the other is objectified and instrumentalized, and the I-thou relationship, where the other is encountered in their fullness of being. Authentic relationships are characterized by true presence, full attention to the other without hidden agenda, emotional transparency, the capacity to share one's inner truths, deep listening, welcoming the experience of the other without projection, benevolence, genuine concern for the well-being and growth of the other, healthy differentiation, maintaining one's integrity while being in relationship. The fertile paradox of relational authenticity resides in its reciprocity. It is often in the mirror of authentic relationships that we discover aspects of our true self that remained invisible in solitude. For many spiritual traditions, selfless service constitutes the ultimate expression of authenticity. When we act from our true nature, right action emerges naturally, without egoic calculation. The concept of dharma in Indian traditions evokes this convergence between right action in the world and the expression of our essential nature. Similarly, the notion of vocation, literally calling, in the Christian tradition suggests that our life mission is intimately linked to our authentic essence. Psychologist Viktor Frankl, founder of logotherapy, demonstrated that meaning, this orientation towards something greater than oneself, constitutes a fundamental need of the human being. Paradoxically, it is often in forgetting ourselves, in the service of a cause that transcends us, that we find ourselves most authentically. In helping others, I discovered who I truly was, shares the volunteer. That's the great paradox, observes the philosopher. In giving, we receive. In forgetting ourselves, we find ourselves. The path to authenticity is not linear but spiral. It includes periods of rapid advancement and plateau phases, moments of luminous clarity, and passages through darkness. Psychologist Robert Kegan proposes a developmental model where each new stage of authenticity implies a disidentification with what we previously took to be our self. What was subject becomes object. We can now observe it with distance rather than being fused with it. This developmental progression can be conceptualized as an expansion of consciousness. From the conventional self, defined by social roles, to the autonomous self, defined by our own values and principles, to the transpersonal self, which transcends individual limits. Each transition involves a form of death and rebirth, what mystical traditions have often described as the dark night of the soul. The quest for authenticity can be distorted by perfectionism, this tendency to want to achieve an idealized state of self. Paradoxically, this fixation on an ideal can itself become a form of inauthenticity. True authenticity involves accepting our complete humanity, our contradictions, our shadow aspects, our vulnerabilities, and our limitations. As poet Walt Whitman expresses, "Do I contradict myself? Very well then, I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes." Psychiatrist Carl Jung suggested that true individuality is not the elimination of all problematic aspects of the personality, but their conscious integration into a larger and more balanced totality. "I thought spiritual awakening would make me perfect," confides the practitioner. "Awakening is not perfection," responds the master, but the capacity to embrace imperfection with compassion. Our era presents particular challenges for the quest for authenticity. The ecological crisis, geopolitical tensions, growing inequalities, and technological disruptions create a context of uncertainty and anxiety that can reinforce our defense and flight mechanisms. Paradoxically, these crises can also serve as catalysts for a deeper awakening to our true nature. As philosopher Charles Eisenstein observes, the civilization of separation, founded on the illusion of an isolated and autonomous self, is reaching its ecological and social limits, opening the possibility of a new paradigm based on interconnection. At the crossroads of these civilizational paths, personal authenticity acquires a collective dimension. Each individual who anchors in their true self contributes to the transformation of the broader social field, what physicist and activist Joanna Macy calls the Great Turning. At the end of this exploration, we understand that the quest for the true self is not so much the search for a hidden essence to discover once and for all, but rather a dynamic and continuous process of unveiling, integration, and expression. Authenticity is not a fixed state to achieve, but a quality of presence to cultivate, a way of being in relationship with oneself, with others, and with the world around us. As philosopher Henri Bergson suggests, the authentic life could be conceived as a self-creation by the self, not the discovery of a pre-existing self, but the continuous creation of a self that emerges at each moment. This journey toward authenticity is both deeply personal and universally human. Our specific paths differ, but the aspiration to live from our inner truth connects us beyond cultural, religious, or philosophical differences. "Is the path ever finished?" asks the disciple. "The path and the walker are one and the same thing," responds the master. When this is realized, each step is both a departure and an arrival. In a world that often values having over being, appearance more than essence, performance rather than presence, the quest for the true self represents a silent revolution, a revolution of consciousness that, person by person, could transform our way of inhabiting the earth. May this exploration be an invitation to undertake or deepen your own journey toward authenticity, not as a distant destination to reach one day, but as a living possibility at each moment, in each breath, in each encounter with life as it presents itself. For ultimately, the true self was never lost. It simply awaits recognition, here and now, in the luminous simplicity of our conscious presence.